Hello Steelers, and welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you how I painted these Warlord Games epic scale British Napoleonic figures for games of black powder. You can also use these with other rule sets, and they will also work well with other 15mm scale figures too. Before we begin, I'm going to state here and now that these will not be the most detailed painted figures, but they will look good from tabletop distance en masse and in games. It can be rather daunting when you buy the Waterloo starter set and can be presented with so many sprues of these figures, but using these techniques will get you an army together in as short a time as possible. One thing to do is just to do a couple of strips at once and treat each strip as though they are a single figure. That way painting them doesn't feel as daunting. Also, I'd advise on breaking it up by either painting something completely different after you've finished each full sprue. This way you minimise fatigue from just painting endless red coats and crossbells as you work your way through the full box. Before we begin painting though, we're going to have a look at the figures a little bit closer. When you first look at the sprue, you'll notice a number of things. First, the strips of the basic British infantry themselves, but not only that, there are also two groups of 95th Riflemen, you get a cannon and crew, and also a commander figure. I'm not going to be painting these in this video, but I'm just going to be concentrating on the infantry. However, the infantry are also split into four types. You've got the centre companies, you've got the command, you've got the grenadiers, and you've also got the light infantry. The command is obvious to see because they've got flagpoles and a commander, but the latter two are a little bit more difficult to spot immediately. The grenadiers and the light companies have got wings on their uniforms, which show the position in the battalion. The grenadiers stood on the far right, whilst the light company stood on the far left when the battalion was formed. So use the wings on the shoulders of the figures to identify which is which here. Thankfully these are grouped together on the sprue, and it makes it a little easier just to identify them. I'm not going to be covering these companies in the video, but just so you're aware, the grenadiers had white plumes, whilst the light companies had green plumes and also green braiding on their shakos. So as I've said, painting Napoleonic figures can be daunting, and there are a million books on the subject of uniforms. One of the best I've ever found is this book on the British Napoleonic uniforms, which even includes the Pantone codes for the various shades. However, there is also an excellent online source that is free, and it's called the Mont-Saint-Jean website. This French site, which can be translated by Google into English for those like me who don't read French, covers the entire 100 Days campaign armies and the uniforms of each unit that took part. I have seen some criticism of the accuracy in places, but overall this is an incredible resource, and with the help of Google Translate you'll soon work out most of what you need. Using the Mont-Saint-Jean website, I decided I wanted to paint my chaps as the 2nd Battalion of the 69th South Lincolnshire Regiment. There was no particular reason for this, but these served at both Quatre Bras and Waterloo as part of the 5th Infantry Division during the 100 Days campaign. They were badly mauled by French cavalry at Quatre Bras, and they also lost their colour during the same battle, although the 16-year-old Officer Clark rescued it back despite receiving 22 sabre cuts. In this video I've mostly used Vallejo paints for the painting. I will put a list in the description down below. I began painting by undercoating the figures on the sprue with white primer spray. I use white as it helps the bright colours stay bright during the painting. Some people may use black, but I prefer white for smaller figures. You may have to go over the sprue a couple of times just to get the full coverage. Once the primer is dry, I remove the strips of figures and blue tack them to the top of all paint bottles, so I have something to grip and a way of getting around all the bits of the figures themselves. Then, using Vallejo flat red, I begin painting the tunics of the figures. This is painted quickly and roughly at this stage. Don't worry too much about getting the red on other areas, or these are going to be painted anyway. I also dot the bottom of the shako plume while I am doing this stage. Then, using Vallejo's neutral grey, I begin painting the trousers. Here I try to be a little bit neater and not get the paint on the red tunics, but don't worry, as you can always go back later and make any repairs where things are spilled. I also paint the blanket roll on the top of the backpack, and I ensure that both sides of them are also painted. Black is next, and this is used for the shakos, for the boots, for the backpacks and also the cartridge cases. You can also paint the scabbard of the bayonet here if you want, but I missed it out. Just be careful and try to be as neat as possible, again not going over the previously painted areas. Once the black has dried, which won't take long, I start work on the flesh using Vallejo's skin tones. Using a small brush, I paint the faces and the hands. I would ensure that you look closely at the models, as the hands can be a little bit difficult to spot immediately. Now the most difficult bit begins, and this is painting white. It will take a small brush and patience. I thin down the paint slightly with some water just to get a good flow of pigment, and then whilst holding my breath begin painting the crossbelts and backpack straps on the front. I also lightly touch the braiding on the front of the tunic with the brush just to bring it out somewhat, and also the braids on the shako front. I turn the figures over and paint the white stripes on the backpacks, being as neat as I can. I don't worry too much about this, because I can always go back with the base colours and cut in any mistakes and spills that I've made while I'm painting. Then using beige brown, I paint the wood of the muskets on both the front and the back. I didn't do it here, but if you have a small enough brush you can also paint the hair on the back of the heads of the figures if you want. Moving on to the knapsacks, I paint these in Vallejo's Dark Sand. This is a nice linen colour and it really pops against the previous darker colours that I've already painted. The British Army water bottle was blue, and for this I'm using flat blue. Perfectionists will say this is probably the wrong shade of blue, but it certainly looks nice from a distance, and I really want these figures to have some colour on them other than just the black and the red on the tabletop. The metal parts of the muskets and bayonets are then painted in oily steel. Gunmetal grey will also work well here, however that is a little bit darker, and our washing stage is going to darken up the oily steel anyway. Whilst everything dries, I paint the base in flat earth. I use a biggish brush for this just to get it done quickly, but I do try to be as neat as possible up around the boots. Again, you can always go back and rectify any mistakes you make with the original colour. Then it's time for the collars and the cuffs, and in this case I'm using intermediate green for the green of the 69th Regiment's colours. Just use a very small brush when doing the collars and try to be neater than I am here, not that any mistakes will be seen at tabletop distance anyway. Then Vallejo's brass is used for the shako plate and also the crossbelt plate as well, and this is simply a case of just dotting in the colour in the right place. Once all the base colours are block painted, I begin the washing of the figures using Citadel's Agrax Earthshade. I paint this on with a biggish brush, and I use the brush just to draw off any areas where it can pull sometimes, and I just try to ensure that the coverage is even across all the figures. Now if you really wanted to you could leave it here, however I leave this to dry overnight and then I move back to actually highlighting various parts of the figures. I don't do everything, but just some parts to make the figures pop a little. First thing is the flesh. Using the base colour, I go back and dot in the high parts of the face and the hands. Then the grey trousers and the blanket rolls are hit again with neutral grey. This is once again on the raised parts of the model, just to give it a sense of lighter areas and a little bit of shade. Once again, the most difficult part is the white, but being careful, this stage can easily be completed quickly. I just carefully go over the belts and straps with thinned down white paint. Breathing out again, I then highlight the knapsacks with dark sand, go over the collars and cuffs once again with a base colour green, and I also do the same with the blue water bottles. Finally, I revisit the tunics with red. This is mostly on the arms and other flat open areas, such as the bit below the backpack. Just touching the area with a paintbrush and emphasising the raised areas of the models once again. I paint two of the included bases in flat earth, and then using polystyrene cement, glue the strips in place and leave them to dry. We are at the very last stages now, and I base my figures quite simply. I use PVA glue painted onto the base and then sprinkled with static grass. I don't use an applicator for this, as blowing on it will make the grass stand up anyway, and this grass is a good match for my tabletop cloth. Then the final touch is to add the flags to the command strip. I find the regimental flag of the 69th along with the King's colour on the sheet of flags that are provided in the box set. I use a sharp small scalpel to carefully cut these out and then carefully fold the flag in half. Then I paint PVA glue onto the back of the flag and press the two halves together, leaving a small gap at the pole end and slide it over the pole itself. Then using tweezers, I carefully press the two halves together to ensure the bond is tight. I didn't film this, but once the PVA glue is dried, I paint the edges of the flag to cover the white and bend it as though it's blowing in the wind. And there we have it. Once I've completed the other 4 strips, I have a quickly painted battalion ready for battle. As I said, these are not Golden Demon winners, and the biggest stumbling block is a large number of figures to paint in the box sets. Paint them with the idea of seeing them from 3 feet away and you'll still have the box completed. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please do leave a comment and also a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe, and I'll see you in the next Storm of Steel video.